Chapter 26 of Zhang Henshui's Golden Pink Family, repeatedly revealing the beauty of the spring together. Don't talk about ancient times and listen to the local accent. Yanxi and Qingqiu each hung up a lantern riddle and were eager to solve it. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, Yanxi went to the park from home and walked to the waterside pavilion. He saw Qingqiu sitting on a chair under the shade of a willow. Wearing only a white bamboo cloth gown, a Japanese paper umbrella was placed on the chair. He held a pocket-sized book in his hand, and read there. She didn't raise her head, just lowered her head and read. Yanxi came up and smiled and said, "Are you still angry with me?" Qingqiu put down the book and stood up, smiling, and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Please sit down." Yanxi said, "Don't tell lies. I saw you from afar, just looking at the person coming. Then I didn't know why, but I picked up the book just now. Don't you believe me?" Yanxi smiled and said, "I didn't see it. Let me guess." Yanxi dragged a wicker chair and sat down next to Qingqiu. Qingqiu suddenly said, "I am now very opposed to the public social interaction between men and women." Yanxi smiled and said, "Why? Do you have any feelings? I know you misunderstood. I wanted to explain this matter in my letter yesterday, but I was afraid of saying no, King. So I asked you to come here to talk." Qingqiu put the small book in his arms and fiddled with it, lowering his head and not looking at Yanxi. He just said, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm talking about myself, not others." Yanxi said, "Who is me? Who is others? I don't understand. You have to tell me." "Qingqiu," he said, "what do you not understand about your own affairs? Come and ask me." Yanxi asked the waiter to make another pot of tea, poured the new tea for Qingqiu, and poured a cup for himself, holding the teacup. Sip tea slowly, and look at the clear autumn. Seeing her lowering her head in silence, her clothes were trembling slightly, and her feet were probably swaying under the table, which was a sign that she was thinking about something. Because she lowered her head, reflecting the sunlight, she saw that the short hair and vellus hair under her temples had not been shaved off. Yanxi smiled and said, "The classmate who cut your hair is really an amateur. Why don't you cut off the hair?" Qingqiu pursed his lips and smiled, and said, "You are so lenient. How can you control other people's faces?" Yanxi said, "I saw it, so I asked out of the blue." Qingqiu said, "I already had it repaired at the barber shop. Why do I still blame my classmates?" Yanxi said, "Why didn't the barber shop give it to me? What about shaving it off? It was probably done by a female barber, so it's not very clever." Qingqiu said, "You have nothing to say. How can he dare to shave it off if I don't tell him to do it?" Yanxi said, "Why don't you want him to shave?" Qingqiu said, "If you don't understand, don't ask." "Is this what you asked me to come here to ask?" Yanxi said, "If you're not asking about this matter, it doesn't matter if you say a few words first. Aren't you angry with me because I fooled around at home for 2 days and didn't show up to you? In fact, you have completely misunderstood." So he talked about the quarrel between Fengzhu and his wife, how to reconcile it, and how they played cards at home. As for who was playing cards, he never mentioned a word. Qingqiu said with a smile, "Of course it is a fact that they are playing cards, but what are they playing cards about? Where are people?" Yanxi said, "Who is there? Of course it's family." Qingqiu smiled and said, "According to me, there are also family members and distinguished guests, right?" Yanxi said, "I know that the person you are worried about is Miss Bai Shuzhu." Qingqiu said, "Why am I worried? So what if you don't worry?" Yanxi hit a wall when he opened his mouth, so it was difficult to say anything. After a moment of silence, he hummed Pihuang opera again. Seeing that he was silent, Qingqiu glanced at Yanxi again while drinking tea, but smiled. Smiling, Yanxi smiled and said, "Why are you dressed so plainly today, without any clothes on? In the future, it will no longer be fashionable and cannot be worn anymore." Qingqiu said, "It's better not to wear anything. If you get used to wearing it and you won't have to wear it in the future, what should you do?" Yanxi said, "Probably not. Although I, Mr. Jin, cannot do anything big, I think we can still keep our share of the ancestral heritage. Just relying on my share of the family property can sustain our life's food and clothing. What are you afraid of?" Qingqiu said, "Humph. What kind of food and clothing do you need to maintain? I can't even maintain my credit. In my opinion, Qingqiu said the word stroking the small volume of book in his hand, unable to continue. Yanxi said, You are a very smart person. Why can't you see through this? If I am not strong-willed, can I still live in Luohuahutong with my family behind my back? I really want to ask your uncle to bring this matter up with your mother. But once it was brought up, she agreed, so it wasn't a problem. If you don't agree, I will have to avoid it and I will be embarrassed to live in your place, so I hesitate. Qingqiu said, what you said is really making me stop eating because of choking. I think what you said may not be true. Yanxi said, I am indeed telling the truth. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. But since yesterday, I have decided to tell your uncle within a day or two. But your uncle will go to Tianjin tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, so we have to wait until he comes back. Qingqiu said, it's not too late to come back. Why are you so hesitant and suddenly made up your mind? Your preface does not match what you say later, which shows that you are talking nonsense. Yanxi said, of course there is a reason for this. It was my mother who mentioned that it would be too expensive for me to set up a poetry club outside, so she asked me to move it home. Since my mother mentioned this sentence, my father must have said it not once. I will definitely have to move out soon. Since I want to move out, I might as well explain it. Even if I hit a wall, I won't have to see your mother in the future, so I don't have to hesitate. Qingqiu said, my mother will never give you a chance. She's not a fool. Can't she see some things? If you don't mention it, she will know. Yanxi said, in this way, has she expressed any opinions in front of you? Qingqiu said, how can she express anything? I just experienced it. Let me ask you, who do you ask to speak out about this matter? Yanxi raised his head and thought quietly for a while, then shook his head and said, it's not easy to find a suitable person like this, because we have no contact with each other. Qingqiu said, because there is no suitable person, should this matter be put aside? Yanxi said, as long as I have questions, you will push me further. How should I speak? I think there is only one person to invite for this matter, and if you invite this person, you will have to spend a lot of time telling her the matter in detail. Qingqiu said, who are you inviting? Do you have to tell people anything? Speaking of which, I put a book against it just as I was talking about this. I walked to the intersection of Tianmen and looked up, and I happened to meet Miss Wu. Again. Miss Wu smiled from afar, and said, oh, Miss Leng, long time no see. Qingqiu wanted to dodge at this time, but it was too late. He had to smile and go forward. Miss Wu said, it's still early. Are you planning to leave? Qingqiu said, we've been here for a long time. It's time to go back. After thinking about it, this sentence was a little too rash. Just as she was about to think of something to say, Miss Wu turned to Yanxi and said, I've been here for a long time. Where are you sitting? Yanxi felt that there was a hint in her words, and said with a smile, I've got it. I think it's not interesting to be in a circle, so I have to go back. Miss Wu said, I said you were busy, but you were busy. When I went to the house, I didn't meet you once. I said you were busy, but you were busy. We can meet each other often when we go shopping. Yanxi smiled and said, that's right, but Miss Wu is about the same as me. I plan to stay cool for half a year and prepare English at home next spring. Just go to school in the United States. Miss Wu said with a smile, is this true? Yanxi said, I have been planning this for a long time, but I have made up my mind this time. Said, great, I also plan to go to the United States next spring. Maybe I can have a companion while walking. As they talked, Qingqiu took the umbrella from Yanxi's hand and used the copper tube on the umbrella tip to draw pictures, land on the ground and just listen quietly. Miss Wu turned around and saw her in this state, as if her relationship with Yanxi was not that deep. He said, Miss Leng, do you come to the park often? Qingqiu then raised his head and smiled. It's hard to come here. Miss Wu took a step forward, held Qingqiu's hand, and said, Miss Leng, I love you very much. Let's talk about it. Let's meet in the park one day, okay? What's your phone number? Qingqiu was about to say that there was no phone, but Yanxi rushed to tell her her phone number. It turns out that Qingqiu's family has telephone calls, and they always borrow them from here. Miss Wu said, great, I'll call you one day to invite you. We'll meet again. As she spoke, she held Qingqiu's hand and shook it a few times. She released her hands and walked away with a high profile. Qingqiu saw that there was no shadow of her in the cypress forest, and then he smiled at Yanxi and said, this person is a romantic communicator, not rigid at all. Her friendship with you is not bad, right? It seems that she's very close. Yanxi said, since you know that she is a romantic communicator, what is the word very close about? Qingqiu said, I didn't say it was a problem. Ah, you said it yourself first. This has become a problem. Yanxi remained silent and just smiled. As he walked along the corridor talking, he reached the gate before he knew it. Qingqiu saw Yanxi's car parked in the middle of the road. He said, you go by car, I'll walk back. Yanxi was about to say that she didn't come by car, but before she could say a word, she saw the car door opened, and Yufan and Aunt Kui got out of the car together. Unexpectedly, my heart skipped a beat. At this time, Qingqiu was standing next to Yanxi. Yanxi had left Qingqiu and went to greet her, for fear of offending her. If you don't want to go forward, you're afraid that Yufan will see her and have to introduce her, which she doesn't want to do. While hesitating like this, Qingqiu held a paper umbrella and squeezed through the pile of cars. Yanxi felt happy again when she saw Qingqiu being so clever. Yufan came over early and called, Old Qi, have you just arrived? Or are you leaving? Yanxi said, I have just arrived too. When I saw you guys coming, I just stood here and waited. They said after talking, they came in again. Yufan said, Lao Qi, why do you come to the park alone? Yanxi said, can't you come alone? Why 3 words? Yufan said with a smile, are you still pretending to be stupid? I saw you walking out of the gate with a female student, but I don't know why you disappeared in a short time. He is your good friend. It doesn't matter if you introduce him to us. Why are you hiding like this? Yanxi said with a smile, where's this? You are blinded. Yufan said, I am not 70 or 80 years old. I can't see clearly alone. There is another person who saw it. Are we making up rumors out of thin air? Kui Fen said. The aunt pursed her lips and said with a smile, the 3rd sister is also troublesome. Since she is lying to you in person, of course it is a matter of keeping a secret. Why are you trying so hard to expose this matter? Yanxi said, on the contrary, I met a person as soon as I walked out of the door. I said a few words to her, but I didn't meet her in the park. Yufan said, this is getting more and more wrong. Just now you said you just arrived at the door, and now you say you're in the park. Come out. It's obvious that you are lying. At this time, they had walked through the corridor and arrived at Leijin Yuxuan. Yanxi put the matter aside while she was looking for a seat. After sitting for a while, I slipped away with the help of a small matter. Yufan said, I seem to have heard that Lockie and a girl named Leng are always together, day and night. I guess the person I met just now is that person, don't you think? Aunt Kui said, maybe. She's not bad looking, but Lockie likes to be lively. How come Miss Leng is dressed so plainly? Yufan said, I can't imagine that. I thought Miss Leng was always flashy and fashionable. Aunt Kui said, their feelings are so strong, won't they make a fool of themselves? Yufan said, I see that Lockie has been very cold to Sister Shuju recently. Besides, they had such a big fight last time. I'm afraid they won't be on good terms in the future. Maybe Lockie wants to marry this girl named Leng. Aunt Kui said, that may not be the case. It's just that the coach, once there is such an intention, the family may not approve it. Yufan said, does Dad know about this? Aunt Kui smiled and said, if we don't tell him, how would he know? Yufan said, did Aunt Kui mention this? Aunt Kui said, I don't care about the big and small things in their family. As for the affairs of these young masters, their mother doesn't ask much. Why should I bother with those things? Yufan said, in your opinion, is it better for the marriage between the 7th brother and the Bai family to be completed or terminated? Aunt Kui said, of course it is better to complete it. Miss Bai is very smart and beautiful, and she is a perfect match with the 7th brother. Compared with you, sisters-in-law, she is not necessarily inferior to anyone. Yufan said, that's what I said too. It would be a pity if this marriage didn't happen. Aunt Kui smiled and said, since in that case, why don't you drink a bowl of winter melon soup from him and help them make it a success? Yufan said, they are already in a ready situation, so there is no need for a matchmaker. But both sides are indifferent, and I'm afraid that they will give up. As long as one person can bring them together, it will be done. Aunt Kui smiled and said, on one side is the cousin, and on the other is the brother-in-law. You have to do this. Peng Zhen always says that he wishes all lovers in the world to get married. Haven't you heard of it? Yufan said, it's hard for me to say this because I am a relative of the Bai family. If I were only a relative of the Jin family, I would have told my mother a long time ago and asked her to preside over it and get it done. Aunt Kui said, "What's the big deal about relatives? In the world, matchmakers and introducers rely on strangers instead of relatives and friends." Yufan said, "But this matter I didn't care about it, because I didn't care about it." What is puzzled? What is the reason? Aunt Kui laughed. Men are like this for women, not only the old seven. The young couple are nothing to talk about, but don't say this to my third. I am a person who is not used. In the future, I will be able to confront you from disappointment, but I can't afford this big responsibility. The two of them sat and talked for a while, and more people came here. Yufan said, "It's too lively, let's go back." Aunt Kui said, "Let's take a detour." Yufan said, "I'm afraid of getting tired, so I won't go." Aunt Kui said, "We come to the park in a hurry. Sit here as soon as we enter the door, and go back immediately when we get tired. Are we afraid that we won't have coffee or soda to drink at home?" Yufan smiled and said, "That's true. When I sit at home, I always want to go to the park for a walk. But when I come here, I feel that it's boring and I don't want to walk. Otherwise, let's not go home first, and go to the roof of the Zhongwei Hotel to watch dancing." Aunt Kui said, "Forget it. I went there last time, and your eldest sister-in-law was with me. I was only back at 1 o'clock. The old man knew about it, and he pouted for several days when he saw me. I can't dance, and it's boring to sit and watch others dance. I have an interesting thing that I have been wanting to say for a long time." Yufan said, "What did you think of? Since it is interesting, why didn't you tell it earlier?" Aunt Kui said, "There are two difficulties in this matter. First, I don't know if the old man agrees or not. Second, this person must be given a place to live." Yufan said, "Don't beat around the bush. What is the interesting thing? Just tell it first." Aunt Kui said, "I didn't know at first. One day when I went to Zhu's house, I asked the young ladies and their family if they played cards. They all said no, and the story last night was about the important part, and they would continue to listen to it tonight. So I asked what book they were listening to. As soon as they told me, I knew. It turned out that they invited to storytellers from Suzhou. One was telling the Jade Dragonfly and the other was telling the Marriage of Three Smiles. The reward was outside, and each person only needed 200 yuans a month. But there was one thing, the storyteller had to live at home, and his house and food had to be prepared." Yufan said, "I used to like listening to this when I was in the south, but I didn't have the opportunity to listen to it when I came to the north. Now I have this thing. I can sit at home and listen, without going out. Where are the storytellers now? Is it okay once I say it?" Aunt Kui said, "He was originally in Beijing, and I heard that he went to Tianjin recently. But it's very easy to invite him. Just make a phone call and he will come." Yufan said, "Is it the one who talked about Jade Dragonfly?" Aunt Kui said, "Not this person. There is another one who talked about Pearl Tower, and he talked about it very well. I wanted to listen to Three Smiles, but I'm afraid the old man doesn't want to talk about this book, so he didn't mention it. Now that someone has come to talk about Pearl Tower, it's an opportunity." Yufan said, 200 or 300 yuan, not much money, but he has to live in our house, which is not easy to do. Aunt Kui said, "Let's go back and talk about it. If they agree, we can clear a room in the front, which is not difficult." Yufan said, "Great. I'll tell them first when I go back. I guarantee they will agree." She was so happy that she immediately took a car back. When she got home, she proposed it to everyone, and Mrs. Jin and the second concubine both agreed. With the two of them in charge of the matter, when they mentioned it to Jin Quan just said it was vulgar, but did not object. The next day, they called Tianjin and asked the storyteller to come. The storyteller was called Fan Zhaofeng, and he specialized in telling the Tansi Pearl Tower. He also had an apprentice named Lin Yiking, who could tell Pipa Ji. They were in Tianjin, telling some temporary short stories in various mansions, and now the Jin family called to invite them. This was naturally a big deal, so they answered the phone and took the train to Beijing that night. This matter was handled by the wife and the mistress, and they never contacted the master and the young master. When master and apprentice Fan Zhaofeng arrived at the Jin mansion, they gave their business cards and went to the number room. The number room went all the way to the upper room to Chen Ming, Mrs. Jin. Mrs. Jin said, "Just ask him to come in." The number of rooms went out, and led the master and his apprentice to the upper room. They performed the ancient etiquette and bowed deeply 3 times when they saw Mrs. Jin. Mrs. Jin saw an older man, about 50 years old, with thin cheeks, sunken lips, and a few black teeth. His face was pale and full of smoke. However, although his face was haggard, his clothes were very beautiful. He wore a long blue spring silk gown and a shiny gauze jacket. The front half of his head was bald, and the back was sparse and pale, but he wore a Western-style hairstyle. The younger man had his hair combed smoothly, and his skin was white. Although he was still fair, his complexion was bloodless, and there was a faint blue line under his eyes. His clothes were more gorgeous than the older one. After they exchanged greetings, the older one introduced himself as Fan Zhaofeng and pointed at the younger one, who was Lin Yiking. Although he was a few years older, he spoke the delicate Suzhou dialect. Mrs. Jin was satisfied at first when she heard his hometown dialect, and then she was even more pleased when she saw Fan Zhaofeng was humble and kind, so she smiled and asked them to sit down. Fan Zhaofeng said, "I was planning to go back to Shanghai, but because I received a call from your house, I came to Beijing to serve the madam and the young mistress, but I don't know when to start." Mrs. Jin said, "People in our family are like this. If we want to do something, we do it right away. It's too late tonight, so let's do it tomorrow." Fan Zhaofeng did not dare to sit for long, so he bowed and left with Lin Yiking. Once this matter was brought up, it attracted many wives, aunts and grandmothers they knew. At 8 o'clock in the afternoon of the next day, a desk was set up in the living room downstairs, and many seats were placed in front of the table. In addition, many refreshments were prepared for the female guests. Yufan and Kuyi came out to entertain them. There were many flowers and decorations, and it was a lively scene. However, this time, the Jin family was an exception. Not a single male guest joined, so the young masters who were interested in doing things did not participate. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.